The massive Vrelian ship descended through Earth's atmosphere with surprising grace for its size. Humans all over the planet watched their screens in awe as the first official diplomatic vessel from the stars approached the landing site in Geneva. James Reed adjusted his tie for the fifth time, trying to calm his nerves. As the youngest xenolinguist on Earth's first contact team, he had spent the last 6 months studying the limited Vrelian language samples sent ahead of the delegation. His colleagues call him brilliant but awkward. Today, those language skills mattered more than his social graces. "Remember," Director Miller whispered to the assembled human team, "nothing impulsive. Follow protocol. The Vrelians value order and hierarchy above all else." James nodded, though his mind was still processing the 13 different greeting variations he had memorized, each specific to different Vrelian social ranks. The ship's main hatch opened with a soft hiss. 2 lines of tall, blue-skinned guards with ornate armor filed out first, their 4 eyes scanning the area with military precision. Then, framed in the doorway, stood King Torvald of the Vrelian Empire, nearly 7 feet tall with elaborate gold markings across his face that signified his royal lineage. But it was the figure beside him that caught James' attention. Princess Lyra stood nearly as tall as her father, but where the king's expression remained stern and judging, her 4 eyes showed open curiosity. The iridescent patterns across her blue skin seemed to shimmer with every movement. Earth's president stepped forward and began the formal greeting. The Vrelian king responded with a series of complex sounds that the translation devices struggled to process correctly. James noticed the confusion spreading across the human delegation's faces. Without thinking, James stepped forward and spoke directly in the Vrelian language, correcting the translation error and offering the proper royal greeting. The human delegation froze in horror at this breach of protocol. King Torvald's upper eyes narrowed while his lower ones widened, a Vrelian expression of surprise. "You speak our language well for a human," he said in his native tongue. "I learn quickly, Your Majesty," James replied, adding the proper honorific clicks. "Please forgive my forward behavior." Before the king could respond, Princess Lyra stepped forward. "How fascinating," she said in perfect English. "Father, this human has mastered our most difficult formal dialect in mere months." Director Miller quickly tried to regain control of the situation, but the damage, or perhaps opportunity, was already created. King Torvald raised his hand for silence. "My daughter requires someone to explain human customs during our stay," the king announced. "This one's linguistic abilities make him suitable." He pointed at James. "You will attend to Princess Lyra as her cultural guide." James bowed, using the proper Vrelian form. "It would be my honor, Your Majesty." Later that evening, as the formal reception began, James found himself standing awkwardly beside the princess as she observed the human diplomats mingling with her father's advisors. "They're all lying to each other with smiles," Princess Lyra said suddenly. "Excuse me, Your Highness?" James asked, startled by her directness. "These diplomats, they say pleasant things while thinking calculating thoughts." She turned her 4 eyes directly to him. "But you're different. When you spoke to my father, there was no deception." James swallowed nervously. "In my position, honesty seemed the wisest choice." Princess Lyra made a sound James hadn't heard before, a Vrelian laugh. "Honesty is rarely considered wise in royal courts, James Reed. Perhaps that's what makes humans interesting." She gestured toward the door. "Show me something real about your world. I've had enough diplomatic falsehoods for one day." As James led Princess Lyra away from the reception, he had no idea that this moment would change both their lives and the relationship between their species forever. Over the next few weeks, James found himself in the strangest job on Earth. Every morning, he would arrive at the luxurious compound where the Vrelian delegation stayed, ready to guide Princess Lyra through another day of human experiences. Today, they'd walked through Central Park. The princess had insisted on minimal security, much to her father's displeasure. She wore a simple blue cloak that partially hid her alien features, though her unusual height still drew curious glances. Your people create parks in the middle of cities, Lyra observed, touching the rough bark of an oak tree. On Vrelia, nature and civilization are kept separate. Humans need reminders of the natural world, James explained. Otherwise, we forget our place in it. Lyra nodded thoughtfully. In the royal palace, we have no such reminders. Everything is designed, controlled, perfect. As they sat on a bench watching children play, Lyra asked the question that had been forming in her mind for days. James, how do humans choose their mates? James nearly choked on his coffee. Well, that's complicated. Some cultures have arranged marriages, but most people in modern societies choose their partners based on mutual attraction, shared values, and love. Love, Lyra repeated the word as if tasting it. We have no direct translation for this concept in official Vrelian language. The closest word means useful alliance. That sounds rather cold, James said before he could stop himself. It is, Lyra agreed, surprising him with her candor. Royal marriages especially. My father is already negotiating my union with Prince Drax of the Mavorian Empire. I've never met him, but our marriage will secure trade routes through 3-star systems. Don't you get any choice in the matter? James asked. Lyra's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of amusement James had come to recognize. Choice. Personal preference has no place in royal duty, James. That's why I find human customs so fascinating. Your people make decisions based on individual desires rather than collective benefit. Not always, James countered. But we believe people who choose their own paths are happier and more productive than those forced to follow someone else's plan. That evening, they visited a small music venue. James had worried the loud sounds might hurt Vrelian ears, but Lyra moved with the rhythm, captivated by the raw emotion of the performers. This music tells truth, she said afterward as they walked under the city lights. Our royal composers create mathematically perfect harmonies, but they lack this feeling. Feeling is what humans do best, James said with a smile. Sometimes at the expense of logic. Back at the Vrelian compound, King Torvald waited with a stern expression. Daughter, you spend too much time among these humans. The trade negotiations are entering a critical phase, and you have duties to prepare for your betrothal ceremony. Yes, father, Lyra said, lowering her eyes respectfully. As James turned to leave, Lyra called out, Tomorrow, I wish to learn about human literature. Stories of people who changed their fates. King Torvald's face darkened. The human will be busy tomorrow. My advisors require his language skills. Then I shall wait, Lyra replied with unexpected firmness. But I will continue my studies of Earth culture. Later that night, in his small apartment, James found himself sketching Lyra's face instead of preparing translation notes. He quickly crumpled the paper, troubled by the warmth he felt whenever he thought of the princess. Whatever was growing between them could never be. She was alien royalty, destined for a political marriage, and he was just a human linguist doing his job. What James didn't know was that in her private chambers, Princess Lyra was reading human history books about revolutions, declarations of independence, and forbidden love that changed the course of nations. The grand hall of the Vrelian compound buzzed with activity as servants prepared for the evening's important announcement. James stood awkwardly at the edge of the room, watching alien diplomats in their formal attire. He hadn't seen Princess Lyra for 3 days, and the absence left him strangely hollow. Read. Director Miller approached with a tight smile. A word. They stepped into a quiet corner where Miller spoke in a low voice. The rumors are concerning me. The princess has been requesting your company too frequently. Some of the Vrelian nobles are talking. We're just cultural exchanges, James defended. I'm doing my job. Your job is to assist the diplomatic mission, not become personally involved with alien royalty. Miller's eyes narrowed. I've seen how you look at her. Remember what's at stake here. The first human-Vrelian trade agreement could advance Earth technology by centuries. Before James could respond, A series of melodic tones announced King Torvald's arrival. The room fell silent as the king entered with Princess Lyra, walking 2 steps behind, as Vrelian protocol demanded. James's breath caught in his throat. Lyra wore formal royal attire, an intricate garment that seemed to flow like liquid metal, accentuating the patterns on her blue skin. But her 4 eyes didn't shine with their usual curiosity. Instead, they remained downcast in formal submission. King Torvald raised his hands, and his powerful voice filled the hall. Honored guests from Earth and Vrelia, I bring news that will strengthen our empires. After successful negotiations, I am pleased to announce the betrothal of Princess Lyra to Prince Drax of the Mavorian Empire. The room erupted in approving sounds from the Vrelian delegates. On a large screen, the image of Prince Drax appeared, a stern-looking alien from a species with gray skin and 6 eyes arranged in a circle. This union, continued King Torvald, will end 3 generations of border conflicts and create the largest peaceful trading zone in our sector of the galaxy. The ceremony will take place in 60 Earth days. James felt the room spinning slightly. He had known this was coming. Lyra had told him about her arranged marriage. But the reality hit harder than expected. When he finally dared to look at the princess, he found her staring directly at him, her upper eyes showing what he had learned to recognize as sadness. Later that evening, as the celebration continued, James found himself alone on a balcony overlooking the city lights. He heard soft footsteps and turned to see Lyra approaching. "Congratulations on your engagement, Your Highness," he said stiffly. "Do not offer false pleasantries, James." Lyra's voice was quiet. "You taught me to value honesty." "What would you have me say?" James asked. "That I think you deserve to choose your own future. That I've grown to." He stopped himself. "Grown to what?" Lyra pressed, moving closer. James shook his head. "It doesn't matter. You have your duties, and I have mine." "I've been studying human history," Lyra said. "Your people once accepted arranged marriages as normal. Kings and queens married for political advantage. But you evolved beyond that. Over many centuries," James pointed out. "Change takes time." "Perhaps." Lyra looked out at the city. "Or perhaps it takes only one person brave enough to challenge tradition. My father believes our hierarchical system is superior to human democracy, but I see how it limits us. Vrelians never question, never change, never feel." James noticed her hands trembling. "Princess, whatever you're thinking." "Do not call me that," she interrupted. "When we are alone, I am just Lyra, and I need you to show me more of your world before I must return to mine. Will you continue as my guide, James?" Her 4 eyes held his gaze with an intensity that made his heart race. Against his better judgment, against all diplomatic protocol, James nodded. "Whatever time we have left," he said, "on yours." What neither of them realized was that King Torvald stood in the shadows of the balcony doorway, his royal face darkening with every word they exchanged. The Grand Unity Gala represented the pinnacle of the diplomatic mission between Earth and the Vrelian Empire. The massive hotel ballroom glittered with decorations from both worlds. Crystal chandeliers hung alongside pulsing Vrelian light orbs, casting a dreamlike glow over the assembled dignitaries. James adjusted his bow tie nervously. As part of the diplomatic team, he was required to attend, though he had been deliberately kept away from Princess Lyra for the past week. King Torvald's orders had been clear. The cultural exchange program was officially over. "Quite the spectacle," Director Miller said, appearing beside James with 2 glasses of champagne. "The trade agreement will be signed tonight, followed by a formal announcement of the princess's engagement details. A historic evening." James accepted the drink, but found he had no appetite for celebration. Across the room, he spotted Princess Lyra entering with her father. She wore traditional Vrelian royal attire, a high-collared gown that seemed to be made from living metal, shifting colors with her movements. 4 armed guards surrounded her. "She looks unhappy," James murmured. Miller gave him a warning look. Not your concern anymore. Reed, you did your job. Now let diplomacy take its course. The Earth president took the stage, delivering flowery remarks about new friendship between the stars. King Torvald followed with a formal speech in perfectly practiced English. Representatives from the Mavorian Empire stood nearby, including several advisors representing Prince Drax, who would arrive next week for the formal engagement ceremony. As applause filled the room, King Torvald gestured for Lyra to join him on stage. And now my daughter will say a few words about this historic alliance. The princess approached the microphone with perfect royal posture. Her 4 eyes scanned the room until they found James. The smallest smile touched her blue lips. People of Earth and citizens of the Vrelian Empire, she began in a clear voice. I stand before you at a historic crossroads between our worlds. The audience nodded approvingly. So far, she was following the expected script. For 10,000 years, the royal house of Vrelia has maintained order through tradition and hierarchy. For 10,000 years, we have arranged marriages based on political advantage rather than personal choice. King Torvald shifted uncomfortably beside her. This was not the prepared speech. But in my time on Earth, Lyra continued, her voice growing stronger, I have learned that there is another way to build connections, a way based on mutual understanding, respect, and a human concept called love. A murmur swept through the crowd. The Mavorian representatives exchanged alarmed glances. Therefore, I cannot proceed with my arranged marriage to Prince Drax. Lyra's announcement caused gasps throughout the ballroom. Instead, I wish to forge a different kind of alliance. With graceful movements, Lyra descended from the stage and walked directly toward James. The crowd parted before her like water. James stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. James Reed, Lyra said, loud enough for everyone to hear, you have shown me that duty without choice is empty. That tradition without purpose is hollow. In you, I have found a mind that challenges me, a spirit that inspires me, and a heart that understands me across the divide of our different worlds. She knelt before him, an action shocking to all Vrelians present, as royalty never lowered themselves before others. I ask you, by my choice and free will, to join your life with mine, to create a bridge between our peoples stronger than any treaty. James Reed, will you marry me? The ballroom erupted into chaos. King Torvald bellowed in outrage. Earth diplomats rushed forward in panic. The Mavorian representatives immediately began transmitting to their homeworld. Director Miller grabbed James's arm. Say no, Reed. This will destroy everything we've worked for. But James saw only Lyra's 4 eyes looking up at him with hope and determination. In that moment, he understood what she was risking. Her title, her heritage, possibly her life, all to challenge a system she believed was wrong. Yes, he said simply, extending his hand to help her rise. I will. As their fingers touched, they knew the real challenge was only beginning. The news spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Within hours, alien princes propioses to human dominated headlines across Earth. Video clips of Princess Lyra kneeling before James played on repeat on every channel. Social media exploded with opinions, memes, and heated debates. In the Vrelian royal ship, James sat beside Lyra in what could only be described as protective custody. 2 royal guards stood at the door, their expressions unreadable. King Torvald had ordered them both confined while he dealt with the diplomatic catastrophe. My father has never been so angry, Lyra said quietly. In 10,000 years of our royal line, no one has ever defied tradition this way. James took her hand, still amazed by the difference in their skin, hers blue and patterned, his tan and plain. Do you regret it? Not for a moment, she replied, all 4 eyes meeting his. But I underestimated the reaction. The Mavorian delegation has already left Earth. They consider this a grave insult. A sharp knock interrupted them. The door slid open to reveal Director Miller, looking like he hadn't slept all night. Reed, we need to talk, he said grimly. The United Earth Council is demanding you reject the princess's proposal immediately. 3 trade agreements have been suspended, and the Mavorians are threatening to cut off access to their space lanes. With respect, sir, this is between Lyra and me, James replied firmly. Miller slammed his fist against the wall. This isn't about your alien romance. This is about humanity's future. Do you understand what you're risking? Centuries of technological advancement, medical breakthroughs, protection against hostile species. And what about her freedom to choose? James interrupted. Does that count for nothing? Before Miller could reply, a young Vrelian aide rushed in. The transmissions from Frelia, sir. There, unexpected. The aide activated a screen showing thousands of Vrelians gathered in the capital city. Many held glowing symbols that translated roughly to choice and new path. What is this? King Torvald demanded, entering the room suddenly. It appears, the aide said nervously, that Princess Lyra's actions have inspired a movement among younger Vrelians. They're questioning the tradition of arranged marriages and rigid hierarchy. Lyra stood, her face showing surprise and hope. Father, our people are ready for change. Perhaps this is. Silence. The king roared. You have created a political disaster that threatens our empire. Prince Drax's father is threatening military action if we do not make amends. Your Majesty, James said, standing beside Lyra, perhaps there's another way forward. Not through force or tradition, but through understanding. King Torvald turned his cold gaze to James. This is your fault. You filled my daughter's head with human nonsense about choice and love. No, father, Lyra said firmly. James showed me possibilities, but the choice was mine. I am still your daughter and a princess of Frelia. I still care about our people's future, but I believe that future must include freedom to choose one's path. A second aide entered and whispered something to King Torvald. The king's expression changed from anger to confusion. Impossible, he muttered. Show me. The aide activated another screen, showing Earth news reports. To everyone's surprise, thousands of humans had gathered outside the compound carrying signs supporting James and Lyra. Love TURANCEND's species read one. Freedom of choice for all beings read another. It seems, Miller said, looking bewildered, that ordinary people on both worlds support this union. King Torvald stared at the screens showing the demonstrations on 2 worlds. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his royal face. Lyra took James's hand again, speaking softly. 2 worlds, 1 future. Perhaps this is how real change begins. James squeezed her hand, but he knew their battle was far from over. The political forces against them were powerful, and traditions didn't change overnight. Yet looking at the crowds supporting them, he allowed himself to feel something he hadn't expected. Hope. 3 days of tense negotiations had passed since the proposal that shocked 2 worlds. King Torvald paced the conference room, where Earth and Vrelian representatives sat in uncomfortable silence. I have consulted with the High Council of Frelia, the king finally announced. There may be a solution. James and Lyra exchanged cautious glances. They had been permitted to attend this session, but not to speak until now. What kind of solution, father? Lyra asked. An ancient tradition. The trial of worth. King Torvald's 4 eyes focused on James. In our oldest laws, when someone outside royal bloodlines seeks to marry into the family, they may prove their worth through 3 challenges. Director Miller leaned forward. What sort of challenges? Tests of body, mind, and spirit, the king explained. No human has ever faced them. They were designed for Vrelian physiology and culture. Most Vrelians who attempt them fail. James understood immediately. This is your way of stopping us while appearing to give us a chance. The king didn't deny it. If you succeed, our laws would recognize your union. If you fail, Princess Lyra will fulfill her duty to marry Prince Drax. And if I refuse to participate, Then you prove yourself unworthy by our laws, and the princess returns to Frelia immediately." The room fell silent. Lyra touched James's arm gently. "You don't have to do this. These trials can be dangerous." James looked into her 4 eyes, seeing worry there. "What would happen if I succeeded?" King Torvald's voice hardened. "Then by our ancient laws, even I could not prevent your marriage. But understand this, human. No outsider has ever completed all 3 trials." 2 days later, James stood in a circular arena aboard the Vrelian royal ship. Hundreds of Vrelian nobles watched from tiered seating, their expressions showing a mix of curiosity and disdain. Earth representatives occupied a small section, looking nervous. The first challenge was physical. James, wearing only light protective gear, faced a creature called a Borax, a massive 6-limbed beast with armored skin. The task was simple but seemingly impossible. Take the ceremonial band from around the creature's neck. The Borax roared in charge. James, despite months studying Vrelian combat techniques, was no match for the creature's strength. 3 times it knocked him down. Blood trickled from his lip as he struggled to stand. From the royal box, Lyra watched in anguish, prevented by tradition from offering any help. After a particularly brutal hit, James lay on the ground, his body aching. Then he noticed something. The Borax always lowered its head before charging. It wasn't attacking randomly. It was following a pattern. Instead of trying to overpower the beast, James began to move differently, watching its eyes, anticipating its charges. The Vrelian crowd fell silent as the human started to move with unexpected grace. When the Borax charged again, James didn't try to fight it. Instead, he dropped and slid beneath its massive body, grabbing the ceremonial band as he passed. The creature skidded to a confused halt as James held up the band triumphantly. For the intellectual challenge, James faced a Vrelian puzzle sphere, a complex device containing thousands of moving parts that needed to be arranged in perfect harmony. Vrelian scholars spent decades mastering such devices. James studied it carefully, then did something unexpected. He combined Earth mathematics with Vrelian musical theory he had learned from Lyra. His fingers moved across the sphere, treating it not as a puzzle but as an instrument. Slowly, the pieces aligned, creating harmonious tones that signaled success. The final challenge was held in a sacred chamber. James stood before 3 doors, each leading to a different path. "The challenge of spirit," explained the ancient Vrelian priest. "Behind one door lies your personal desire. Behind another lies the greater good of both our peoples. Behind the third lies truth. Choose wisely." James paused, considering the test carefully. Then, to everyone's surprise, he didn't choose any door. Instead, he turned to face the watching crowd. "The greatest wisdom I've learned from Earth and Vrelia," he said clearly, "is that we don't have to choose between personal happiness and the greater good. The best path is one we create together." He extended his hand toward Lyra, inviting her to join him. A murmur of shock passed through the Vrelian audience. No one had ever refused to choose a door before. The priest looked to King Torvald, who seemed genuinely surprised. For the first time, he looked at James not with disdain, but with reluctant respect. "The human," the king announced, "has passed the final test. He has shown that sometimes the wisest choice is to reject false limitations." The grand ceremonial hall aboard the Vrelian royal ship had been transformed. Traditional Vrelian crystal formations glowed alongside earth flowers and ribbons. 2 worlds' traditions blended in ways never before imagined. James stood nervously in a suit that combined human formal wear with elements of Vrelian royal attire. The blue fabric shimmered slightly like Vrelian skin, while maintaining the classic cut of an Earth tuxedo. "Still can't believe this is happening," whispered Tom, James's childhood friend who served as his best man. "You're about to marry an alien princess. Talk about overachieving." James smiled but couldn't find words to respond. The past week had been a whirlwind of negotiations and preparations. After passing the 3 trials, King Torvald had reluctantly accepted the marriage, but with strict conditions. Director Miller approached, looking uncomfortable in his formal wear. The diplomatic corps is still trying to process this. You understand that once you're married, you'll hold a unique position in human-Vrelian relations. I know, James nodded. Lyra and I have discussed it. We want to use our marriage to build something meaningful between our worlds. The music changed, a haunting melody composed by blending Earth classical music with Vrelian harmonic patterns. The assembled guests rose as Princess Lyra entered. She wore a gown that seemed to capture light itself. Flowing white fabric interwoven with living Vrelian crystal created an effect that made her appear to glow from within. Her blue skin and royal markings contrasted beautifully with the dress. As tradition demanded, King Torvald walked beside her. His face remained stern, but something had changed in his demeanor since the trials. Perhaps not acceptance yet, but the beginning of understanding. I still do not fully comprehend this choice, the king said quietly as he delivered his daughter to James. But you have earned the right to make it. The ceremony combined elements from both worlds. They exchanged Earth-style vows and rings, followed by the Vrelian binding of life paths, where their hands were wrapped in sacred thread harvested from ancient trees on Vrelia. By the laws of Earth and the traditions of Vrelia, I now pronounce you united in marriage, declared the human official, while the Vrelian priest confirmed their union with the ritual words of his people. When James and Lyra kissed, a human custom that had scandalized many conservative Vrelians, a cheer erupted from the Earth delegation. After a moment of shocked silence, some younger Vrelians joined in the applause. At the reception, King Torvald approached the newlyweds. "Daughter, your mother would have been." He paused, searching for words. "Surprised by your choice, but perhaps she would have understood better than I." "Thank you, father," Lyra said, touching his arm gently. The king turned to James. "Human, James, you now carry the honor of our royal house. Do not forget that your actions will affect both our worlds." "I understand the responsibility, Your Majesty," James replied with a respectful bow. "We hope to build bridges no one thought possible." As the celebration continued, Earth's president raised a toast. "To the first union of our worlds. May it lead to greater understanding between all species among the stars." Later, as James and Lyra danced, she learning human steps while he tried to follow Vrelian movement patterns, she leaned close to him. "Do you ever wonder what our children might look like?" she whispered. James stumbled slightly. "I hadn't thought that far ahead. Is that even possible?" Lyra laughed, the musical sound that had first captured his heart. "With advanced genetic science, yes. They would be the first of their kind. Not fully human, not fully Vrelian, but something new. Something better." 5 years later, a small blue-skinned child with only 2 eyes but intricate patterns across her skin played in the gardens of the New Earth Vrelian Embassy. She was teaching a group of human and Vrelian children, a game she had invented herself. Watching from a balcony, James and Lyra stood hand in hand. Behind them, a much older King Torvald observed his granddaughter with undisguised pride. "She sees no differences between them," Lyra noted. "Only friends." "That's the future we fought for," James replied, squeezing her hand. "A world where boundaries between species matter less than what we can build together." And in the laughter of the children below, the sound of that future had already begun.